Hi there, I'm Christy and I own Hotchkiss Flower Farm. We're located just north of Manning. And I wanted to share what my overview was this year growing cut flowers in our climate using Annelida Soil Solutions. Now, I have primarily used Annelida. Basically it's all I use for starting my seeds and potting and even for amending the soil. The products that I use are all the ones I have listed on my website, but when I'm starting seeds, I'm using the superworm soil. When I'm amending my soil during planting, I'm using the superworm soil or some of the gold and prime organic plus that I've had left over. Superworm soil is the newer product that they've come out with, and 2025 was the year that I really got to see what this soil could do for my farm. Now, this year was really challenging because the weather was very hard to grow cut flowers in. We had a lot of pest pressure in our area. The grasshoppers were terrible. We had drought conditions. We had a very hot spring, early spring, and then it got very, very cold. I don't use chemicals on my cut flowers at all. I don't use any harmful sprays or anything like that, any pesticides. So it was very much a challenge because we had a very big issue with grasshoppers. It was also the tarnished plant bugs were absolutely terrible in this whole area. Thrips were another one that were a constant battle, as well as aphids. It was just a mixed bag. Oh, don't forget to mention the pesky cabbage moth. Those little worms, they caused havoc on in a lot of places in our area, and I also dealt with them as well on my brassicas. However, what I did, and I found it was very, very helpful, was because I had planted and amended all of my soil using superworm soil and worm castings. I found that as long as I was doing regular watering, there wasn't as many issues. They weren't being targeted quite as bad. But what I found to be very helpful was to do a spray on the leaves and on the flowers themselves using the premium liquid extract, which is the liquid that they collect during the composting process using the worms at their facility. And I dilute that with water and I spray it on everything. And I found that that was very helpful because I learned something about the enzymes in the worm castings. At certain points of an insect's development and soft body insects, there's actually enzymes in those that product that actually dissolves the insect itself. It actually damages the insect, and it eventually will go away. But I just found it was such an infestation this year that we still had the presence of things like thrips, especially in the dahlias and the snapdragons. Also, gladiolus really had a lot of issues with thrips. There was very few plants that actually had thrip damage, but they were present. And I've learned that insects, they like to go and kind of nest or create a little home for themselves in plants that can cycle properly, because the plants actually do cool themselves if they are cycling properly. And in these heat waves, sometimes it was getting to the point where it was so hot. I noticed that a lot of grasshoppers would sit on my crops, such as the sunflowers, and they weren't eating them. They were just resting, and that would go on for weeks. The problem with that was that the grasshoppers or the whatever type of crop or insect it was that was cooling themselves, they would go to the bathroom, and just sitting on the plants and having that coating of insects on the plant, it would create stress on the plant. And then eventually they would start to begin to stress out. And then as soon as the plant began to get stressed, then they would start to damage them. But for the most part, I never seen any thrip damage on any of the dahlias or the snapdragons. I did not see any on the sunflowers. The only thing I seen for insect damage was after a while they stressing out the sunflowers, they would start to eat them, mostly the grasshoppers. But it's really hard to, have a really beautiful cut flower without noticing thrip damage, for example. And I did find that spraying the crops with that premium liquid extract, it did prevent that from occurring. And if there was any left live inside the petals of the flower, I was able to wash them out, because basically it was making them unalive, by using that enzyme on the plants. So, spraying them directly. So it does work as a pesticide in my experience. One of the other things that I found is I don't like to use chemicals. Traditionally when you harvest cut flowers and you're selling to a florist, for example, or to a customer that is coming to the farm stand, what the common practice is you cut the flower and you put them in a bleach water, and you treat the water with like a flower preservative that extends the life. And some of those preservatives can actually be very toxic. And I don't like handling them. I don't like taking flowers to somebody who's using the flowers and getting that water that has the preservative on their hands or handling them in any way. And I definitely don't want to myself. So I started to use a little bit of the liquid extract in the water during harvesting, instead of using things like Quick Dip, which is a chemical that is used very commonly throughout the cut flower world. And most florists use it when they receive their flowers. It helps open up the flower, or the stem, so it's able to take up water and hydrate and have a longer vase life. I started to use the liquid extract, and I did notice things like dahlias. I could cut the dahlia when it was near closed bud. It was just starting to open, and it would fully open. It's almost like it's a life support by giving those microbes to the flower, and allowing it to have that in the vase, or during the cut process when I'm harvesting. It allowed that flower to be able to extend its life quite substantially, and actually even to continue to open. I did also notice that there was a lot more fragrance in my flowers and more vibrancy. There was also cold and heat tolerance, about 5 degrees Celsius, anywhere that I used the superworm soil as a soil amendment and sprayed the plants with the premium liquid extract. I did notice that there was at least a 5 degrees Celsius difference in cold hardiness and in heat tolerance. For example, we had a -8 night in September, and we also had a frost in July, and it was a hard frost in July. And things like my Lysianthus, they were able to handle the -8 and still bloomed. And 3 weeks after that, I did have them covered, mind you, but 3 weeks after we had that -8 night, they were still producing blooms, and I was able to harvest beautiful cut flowers from them, and also get some of them to open as well by putting the liquid extract in the water. I also noticed some of the crops, like the anemones, they had less splitting stems. Lots of times they will split and curl. I found that there was less of that this year by using both of those products. And I also noticed that when it comes to things like broccoli, there was lots of cabbage moths, and they were laying tons of eggs. They were damaging the leaves. But when I would spray the extract onto the leaves, eventually those worms would go away. I did find out later that they would kind of go and hibernate or start to cocoon inside of the heads of broccoli when they were more mature, but they stopped damaging them. And I found that really interesting. It was kind of gross, though, because there was lots of broccoli I was not able to use, but it did stop them from actually consuming the plants. So, I still have a lot of learning to do with using these products. All I know is that in areas that I didn't use the product, where I hadn't really amended or used the extract as a spray, the grasshoppers completely ate the plants to the ground, and they didn't exist anymore. I had planted some perennials that I kind of neglected, and I don't have them anymore. The grasshoppers completely ate them. But anything that I used, amended the soil with the superworm soil, or used the premium worm castings or the liquid extract, I did have beautiful cut flowers. I was able to still make profit this year. And I'm definitely very glad that I chose to use Annelida Soil Solutions. Nothing is ever really a magic fix when it comes to flower farming or gardening. But I do know that with every year that goes by that I've used these products, there's a major improvement. Thanks for watching.